G'day gamers, Ranger Tony here with another Pathfinder Kingmaker tutorial video. So in my last video we introduced the Kineticist, and in this episode we're going to go further into the abilities of the Kineticist, namely blasts. So as we saw previously, Kineticists can choose from 4 elements, and these elements can either be physical, elemental, or both. What is not clear about this is the types of damage that the elemental blasts can do and how they can be combined at higher levels. So the air blasts, you can choose either an air blast or an electric blast. The air blast is a bludgeoning type and the electric blast does electric damage. With the earth-based element, you can only choose the earth blast and it does bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. Now it doesn't actually say which one it will do, and so the assumption is that it will do whatever will do the most damage to your opponent. Fire, you can only choose to do the fire blast, and it is elemental only, so it only does the fire type of damage. And water can do either, you can choose either cold blast, which is the energy, or water blast, which is the physical, and it does bludgeoning. So as you can see, air and water both do bludgeoning with their physical blasts, but they do energy-based attacks with their energy blast options. Earth and fire don't have options. Earth is only a physical attack, and it is very versatile because it does bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing, and fire is only elemental. When you choose an element, you then later on, over in the abilities section, we choose the blast type if there are multiples. So here then, while we're choosing our abilities, we can choose which type of blast we want to do. In this case, because we chose air, we can do the air blast, which as you can see here does bludgeoning damage, or we can choose the electrical blast. If I had have chosen fire or earth, I would not have to check anything here. It would just automatically give me the only blast type that is available. Otherwise, you have to select it. You can't change this blast type, so choose wisely. Each element also has a feat that provides defense using that element. Yeah, and you don't get that until 2nd level. So in this case, for air, it's enveloping winds. At level 7 and 15, you gain an extra element. Overall, you can choose an element only twice. If you choose the same element a second time and it has multiple blast types, such as air does, then you will automatically be given the blast type that you have not yet chosen. When you have multiple elements, you can form composite blasts. Composite blasts require more burn but do essentially double damage. The only real advantage, apart from the extra damage, is that the composite blasts might be spreading their damage over multiple damage types. I said might because you can choose a composite blast which is the same element, and in some cases, such as with fire, it's doing all still fire damage or plasma damage, whatever the case may be. So the combined blasts then are the blizzard blast, which is a combination of air and cold blast. It does half piercing damage and half cold damage. So that's an interesting one. Now you've got piercing damage in there, which you didn't have previously. The blue flame blast, which is a combination of fire blast and expanded fire. So you've selected fire a second time. That does purely fire damage. The charged water blast. This is an electrical blast and a water blast. It does half bludgeoning and half electric damage. The ice blast. This is a water and cold blast combined. This does half piercing and half cold, so it's basically the same as the blizzard blast. You have the magma blast, which is an earth and fire blast combined. It does half bludgeoning and half fire. You have the metal blast. This is Earth Blast and Expanded Earth, so Earth twice. This does bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing the same as the normal Earth Blast does, but of course it does twice the damage. Mud Blast, a combination of an Earth Blast and a Water Blast, and it does only bludgeoning damage. Plasma Blast, which is a combination of Air Blast and Fire Blast, does half bludgeoning and half fire. The Sandstone Blast, a combination of air and earth blasts, does piercing and slashing damage, so it'll do half piercing, half slashing. Steam Blast, this is a combination of fire blast and water blast. It does half bludgeoning and half fire damage. And then you have the Thunderstorm Blast, that is a combination of air blast and expanded air. It does half bludgeoning and half electrical damage. All of these composite blasts are also usable via the kinetic blade. If you're going to use composite blasts, either via throwing or with a kinetic blade, you will want to gather energy to offset the burn. At level 16, you gain an ability that reduces the amount of burn of composite blasts by 1, making them more useful. So some composite blasts may cost you nothing at all at that point. Which blasts and composite blasts do I recommend? Early on, I definitely recommend Earth Blast, because early game there are a number of opponents that are actually resistant to things like fire damage or electrical damage or cold damage. But there's very few things early on that are resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. So the Earth Blast does very well early on. Later on in the game, any of the composite blasts that mix up the damage types are useful because they allow you to get around any restrictions like that. So if you do have an opponent that is invulnerable to a certain type of damage, by mixing it up, there's a chance that you're going to be able to at least do some damage to them. So this means that ultimately I would avoid any of the blast types which combine the same element, with the exception of the Thunderstorm Blast, which is the expanded air one, because that does do half bludgeoning and half electric. But the other ones that are a combination of their own element, well, the Metal Blast isn't too bad either, because it's the expanded Earth Blast and it does bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. But the Blue Flame Blast, which is the fire with fire, only still does fire damage. The Blizzard Blast, which is air and cold, isn't too bad either, because it does piercing and cold damage. Oh, sorry, that Blizzard Blast isn't the one I'm thinking of. It's Ice Blast, which does water and cold. That one is okay, because that's essentially water twice. But yeah, things like the Blue Flame Blast probably isn't all that useful, and any of them that end up with really just doing one type of damage. So the Mud Blast, for example, only does bludgeoning damage. And the Blue Flame Blast, because you're only doing that one damage type, you might end up using it against an opponent that is invulnerable to that. The other blast types that are useful, or the other elements that I would consider taking, is any of the water blasts, because fairly early on you get the option to take kinetic healing as a water elementalist, and any sort of healing is good. You do have to remember that kinetic healing does cost you burn to use, and the way the game currently works as of this version that I'm playing at the moment, which I think is 1.06H or something, the way that it works, there's no way to gather power outside of combat. So unless you're trying to heal someone inside of combat, any use of an infusion or wild talent outside of combat will cost you burn. No matter what you do, you can't offset it, which is annoying. Okay, so this has been the introduction to Kineticist Blast types. In other videos, I'm going to talk about blast infusions and then another video on wild talents. If you like this video, please give me a like and you can subscribe. Any comments, please leave them down below and I will see you for the next video. Thanks. Bye.